everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Seeing AI, describing the world for people who are blind and low vision. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a few quick things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We ask that you be kind and respectful to everyone, including our speakers. We want the reactors to be a place everyone feels welcome. Please ask questions using the live YouTube chat. Saqib will be answering questions as we go. In the chat, I will also share a link to our Reactor Meetup page if you're interested in checking out other sessions we have coming up. And today's session will be recorded and added to the Reactor YouTube page in 24 to 48 hours. And finally, near the end, I will share a link to our Reactor survey. If you have a few minutes, we greatly appreciate your feedback. And I am now going to pass it over to Saqib.
Thank you very much. Hi, great to be speaking to you all, or at least speaking to this laptop, which goes all the way over the internet. I'm still not used to this speaking in the virtual online world. So, who am I? As I said, I'm Saqib Shaikh. I lead a team of engineers and scientists at Microsoft, and we're looking at AI for accessibility. So that's how do we use emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and many others to empower people with disabilities to do more. And really, I know this firsthand, this idea that technology can level the playing field and create a more inclusive world for everyone. And I know that because I'm blind myself. And so from childhood, technology was instrumental to bringing me to where I am today. I lost my sight when I was 7. And really, soon after that, I started getting all these gadgets. That's the cool side of being a blind kid. Is, back then it was like a talking watch or a talking this, like everything talked. And then I went to school, and I think, oh my goodness, I don't know what age, less than 10, 8 or 9, they started teaching me to type, because that was like the gateway to my being able to communicate with everyone else, because they could write things that other people could read. But it goes beyond that. So in school, we had gadgets for making raised diagrams, gadget for making tactile maps, printers which would produce braille by making a pin stick through the paper and make raised bumps, and so much more. And of course, talking computers, that's where I learned to program, and set me on this path to be a software engineer. And it's this kind of mindset that actually, someone with a disability has a new set of challenges, a different set of challenges. But for every challenge, there's also a solution. And so I kind of think that people with disabilities are the ultimate hackers, because that's what hackers do, and I mean that in the sense of, creating solutions and not breaking into systems. Hackers find, interesting problems to solve and, well, come up with creative solutions. And so now let's think about inclusive design. So designing for one and then extending to many. And this is this idea that, okay, when I mention accessibility, disability, people are suddenly like a bit bored. They're like, man, no, we want to make the next big startup, the next big thing. We want to get to 1 billion users. Well, you know what? There are 1 billion people with disabilities in the world, so you should include all of them. They're also your early adopters. The community of people with disabilities are typically very early tech adopters because they have so much to gain. The solutions often will be so much more impactful. Years ahead of something becoming part of the mainstream, it might look like a gimmick. And I could certainly tell you so many examples from mixed reality today, which, they're still looking for that, what is the killer app? But actually, today, mixed reality and many other tech are integral to the lives of people with disabilities. This isn't really my field of expertise, but I've seen demos where my friends who are with a physical disability will say, virtual reality lets me explore so much of the world that I didn't have access to before. It really enables me to go places, see things, do things that I was normally excluded from. Or I hear from people who are low vision who are doing really creative things with VR displays where actually it's not the virtual reality, but it's the ability to have an infinitely scrollable monitor. Because if you want to enlarge the text 10x, there's so little that will fit on a monitor. But now, if you have an infinitely scrollable monitor, like it's not only, um, you know, with some of the headsets people talk about being able to have a cinema screen when you're sitting in an airplane, but for other people, it's not just fun, it's productivity, it's essential. So a friend of mine says, actually, yes, there are a billion people with disabilities, but actually all of us are just temporarily able. Because really, disability is a factor of age, it's a factor of situation, bright light in your eyes, or having too much to carry. So, this idea of inclusive design is that let's think holistically about how you include everyone when you're making software. And then actually, you'll be on the cutting edge. You'll be right there when you're solving for one, because eventually it will become part of the mainstream. So, on the next slide, I'm going to go into a few examples of how we've seen this play out in history.
Examples from this.
So, I've got a bunch of examples here from the TEFL. Each of these is a story, and I wish maybe we have a bit of time to go into each one, but we can't go into the whole story. I kind of think I should write a book. But okay, the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, was inspired by family members who were hard of hearing, and that got him into acoustics, and that brought about the telephone. Or text messages, sorry, I'm British, SMS, was originally used by people who were deaf to communicate because it was just such a handy way, and again, essential versus later convenient. We can look at the story of Ray Kurzweil. So, now famous scientist, but when he was really early on in his career, he was sitting on an airplane next to a gentleman who was blind. And he said, "If I could invent anything for you, what would it be?" And the guy said, "I would love to be able to read books." And this is in the 70s. And after a few years, Kurzweil came up with a device the size of a washing machine that could read books. But solving that big problem, taking that big problem, the early adopter with the hard problem to solve, brought about the invention of flatbed scanners, optical character recognition, and text-to-speech. And now those are things that's just built into your smartphone today. And talking of smartphones, the type of touchscreen that we have in our smartphones today came about from someone who started researching that technology because he had really bad RSI and it was too painful to type on a keyboard. And he had this idea of what if there was some flat surface where you could just touch? And of course, on-screen keyboards were used for many, many years, decades, before touchscreens were popularized on smartphones. Same with speech recognition systems. I was at university, I don't know, many, many years ago, with someone doing climate science, and he did his whole PhD thesis with speech recognition. And now it's just your Siri, Alexa, whatever. It's a fun toy, but for many people, it's a lifeline. And audiobooks. So, yeah, the audiobooks, podcasts, it's a thing today, but blind people have had episodic audio going back 20, 30, even more years, and books on tape decades before then, then going back to the late 60s, they're on gramophone. So this is just this idea. I wanted to introduce this sort of a bit of a mind shift about a billion people with disabilities. On the internet, everyone's your audience. So let's include everyone. But let's have this mind shift of these are your early adopters. And when you have someone with a really challenging problem to solve, and you guys, someone with the ability to create solutions out of nothing, and that's why I love being an engineer. It's like open your text editor, tippity tap, and you have a solution to a problem. It's kind of, there's nothing quite like it. I love being an engineer for that reason. So I'm going to talk to you in just a moment about some of the work I've done on seeing AI, but I wanted to put it in this context of my life going from someone who lost his sight to becoming an engineer and to this realization that by being an engineer, we have the ability to change the world, to improve people's lives. And by improving people's life, one person's life, ultimately to change and make the world more inclusive. So that's really, that's the corner of my ethos of everything I do, and that we'll talk about in just a moment. But, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, put them in the chat, and we'll pause a little moment before I carry on, and maybe make it a bit interactive. So I'm not just talking for the next long while. So yeah, do we have anything at the moment?
No questions in the chat yet, but we do have folks joining us from all over, which is really exciting. Thank you everyone for joining today. We can give it a couple more seconds to see if any questions come in, but none yet.
All right.
All right, I think we can keep going.
Let's keep going. Yeah, don't be shy. It's fun to have interactive questions, and even if it's at the end, I will talk for a while, but then we can have a bit of a discussion, and I'm happy to talk more broadly about any of these things. So let's get into seeing AI. And this is a project I started a few years ago now. It started from the first company hackathon. So I was working on, I've worked on various things at Microsoft, including search engines and voice assistants and many other things. But Microsoft gave us the opportunity for the past few years to be able to bring your full self to work. This idea of a company hackathon where you could work on anything for a week. And I kind of, maybe 2014, so I don't know, that's what, 7 years ago, had this idea of, I want a pair of glasses that tells me everything around me. That, a bit like when I'm with a sighted guide, or a family member, it would just tell me, hey, there's someone walking down the street towards you. Oh, your friend's over there across the lobby. Oh, there's a new shop that's opened up. Clearly, AI is nowhere near close enough. But each year we get closer. So I started the Seeing AI project, and then it became my day job, and now we have a growing team. And we've been working on an iPhone app. So you can download Seeing AI from the iPhone App Store today. And it will read text to you, recognize people, identify products, and so much more. And it's really blending together artificial intelligence and HCI, AI plus HCI. So we use computer vision to detect what's around you at any time, what's in the real world. Can we find where the people are? Who are the people? Can we describe the people? What is the text? How much text is flowing into view? But that's the HCI. Like if you have a whole block of text, what do you want to read? When do you want to read it? If you have different objects, how do we prioritize things? So I love working in this creative space of emerging tech and user experience. And so we put this app out there, and it quickly became one of the leading apps for the blind community. And we got a bunch of great feedback. I love the creativity of users. Never imagined how people would use this, from a teacher who connected his phone to a Braille display. This means that you can feel the writing in Braille, and the pins pop up and down, up and down. And so silently, he was able to identify his students as they enter the classroom. And maybe the most creative use I've come across is, before we had currency detection built into the app, we had some users who had trained face recognition to recognize the presidents on the banknotes. So they'd basically made their own currency detector through face recognition. So this is very much like, I see our job as this community, as a dialogue between our users, people with disabilities, and the scientists at Microsoft. So, what are the challenges in life? What are the solutions we can invent? Another exciting feature we launched a little while ago now is this ability to touch a touchscreen and hear what was in a photo. So you can relive your old memories. So you can go through your photo gallery and it describes every photo as you swipe past. But then on top of that, you can zoom in and running your finger over the touchscreen, you'll get a haptic plus audio experience that lets you know more about what's in the photo. It'll tell you when you're going over a car, over a person, over some scenery. And there's so much more I could describe. And, if there's anything you want me to dig into, I certainly will. But yeah, it's really what are the challenges people face? What are the experiences we can bring to assist with that challenge? And then how do we scale this out? How do we make the AI even better? How do we continue evolving this and doing more and more? And yeah, we'll be talking about the future in just a minute, but let's see a video about how one of our users, Andre, has built seeing AI into his life. So let's see if we have the video up.
What you put in, you get out. Two things important to me in life are family and music. They both play a huge part in my life. Technology allows me to be my own one-man band. I try to be as independent as I can, and the way that I do that mostly is with low tech, which is a white cane, and high tech, which is a phone.
Seeing AI.
Seeing AI is one of the biggest deals in technology, I think, at the moment for visually impaired users. It's an app that you can read almost anything, anywhere with it.
Kilburn High Road. Fashion, workspace, mayonnaise.
It has a multitude of functions, and they all work together to produce something that you can use whenever you need it. It might even be considered to be a Swiss Army knife of apps. Of all the parts of seeing AI, I really do think short text is the biggest of the game changers.
Northwest 6.
Because I've never seen anything like that in any other app before. And I like being in the back of cabs or in buses and pointing it out the window and seeing what I pass on the way to places.
Mobile phone NC 4000 services.
One of the greatest things about short text for me is that if there's no one else in the house, I can sort the post into who's who.
Mrs. K. Louis. Mrs. Kirsten Louis.
So I don't open my wife's post and she doesn't get cross with me. Gosh.
Oh, well, Andre.
I'm in Alex.
Come on, fella.
£20.
That's really cool.
Currency is a very useful channel because sometimes it's very difficult to know what notes actually are. So with currency, I can detect that straight away.
£5.
Job done. 2025. Well done.
Preview.
Scene is actually really cool. It's quite descriptive, really.
Processing. A store filled with lots of different types of fruit.
But I think that's pretty amazing.
Terrific.
In my view, one of the best parts of seeing AI is the ability to read pictures from social media. Because so many times someone will send me a picture of something that I cannot understand. So I will share that picture to seeing AI.
Scene. Probably a group of people sitting on a bench in a park.
And then I'll get a description of what it is.
Person. 8-year-old boy with black hair looking happy. 7-year-old girl with brown hair looking disgusted.
And it's changed how I can view social media. It feels like I can participate.
Like, reply.
Far more than I could before.
Thank you for sharing. Handwriting preview.
With Handwriting Channel, I was actually able to read a card from a family member last year. That's the first time I'd actually been able to do that without help.
Dear Dad.
Alice worked. We can tell if Jake's been writing well, if the handwriting tab can recognize it. That's good proof, really.
We love you, Daddy. XXXXXX.
We've got lots of letters.
The effect of having Seeing AI to hand all the time is like having somebody who can see in your pocket.
34-year-old man with a beard wearing a hat looking happy.
Why not?
There's so much more that I can do now that I couldn't before. You've grown up. I think Seeing AI really is a huge technological step down the road, and I hope that we can continue down a road like this for many years to come.
I love that. Just my favorite part of this job. And sometimes I don't think it's a job, I just love what I do. But is hearing from users, just hearing how people build the work that we do into their lives. So can I have another pause? Don't know if we have comments. Again, don't be shy. But if you have any questions about seeing AI or anything else that we're doing, then yeah, do put it in the chat.
Yes, we do have some questions. So the first one is from Lee Walker, and Lee asks, how much is the emergence of 5G driving the tools to make things like this possible? Is the ability to use cloud computing part of the shift that's allowing this?
Amazing. Yes. So cloud computing is one of the key enablers in a sense that for AI in general, where for AI, we had this big shift in AI a few years ago, which was brought about because we started having huge data sets, great compute power in the cloud, and new algorithmic advances. So, there's sort of these three things which enable deep learning to happen. And cloud computing in general is definitely one of those three pillars for deep learning. More generally, it really means that, say, for describing an image, for example, we send that to the cloud because, actually, let me come to that in a moment, but training new models, sometimes you have these many, many gigabyte models when you're in the science phase. So when you're still doing the research, when you're still evolving it, you might have 10, 20 gigabyte models. And that's not something you could do on your laptop. That needs the cloud. And even when you serve it, the models are generally smaller by that point, but it's more than you could ever run on a phone. So what we do is we have a hybrid approach where we run some models locally on your device, and that gives you a really natural user experience. We can run a model on a GPU, 25 milliseconds, certainly under 100 milliseconds, whereas a cloud, up to the cloud and back is going to take a while. But the flip side to that is your on-device model is going to be, 10 meg, 20 meg. But in the cloud, you can have multiple gigabyte models, which are so much more accurate. So cloud is essential for those bigger models. And F5G is exciting in some ways because if you have 5G, it really means that you can have much lower latency for those big models. And in theory, we could get to this world where 5G is running, the 5G cell towers are running closer to the data centers, and therefore you're getting really, really almost real-time potential responses from the cloud. And that would mean that actually even the things we want for the natural user experience could be enabled by the more accurate models. So I think this hybrid on-device in the cloud computation and machine learning is very exciting. And the flip side to that is not everyone has 5G in Europe or USA. You go to emerging markets, 5G is even less available. So I think for the foreseeable future, 5G can never be the only way we do things, but it will be one way. And just one more point on this is 5G also, just something that's on my mind, is at some point, video calls that have become the norm over the past couple of years really send everything to the cloud. So there's privacy concerns and so forth. That's why we don't do that today. But real-time streaming of video and insights back and forth is just becoming really possible with the infrastructure that we have today. But again, we want to make sure we're inclusive of everyone in the world. So thank you so much, Lee, for that.
Awesome. And then we have a couple more questions. So the next one comes from Mosaic Zebra, and they ask, what are desktop software capabilities now for the blind that work remotely?
Desktop software working remotely. So the way someone who's blind will be using a desktop computer is using something called a screen reader. And what that is it's software that interrogates your desktop for metadata. And if you code with accessibility in mind, your apps and your software is going to have metadata in it, which a screen reader can interrogate. Like, oh, the order, if you go in order, these are all the UI elements, these are all the properties of the elements, these are the actions that each element can have. And then it will speak that out loud, and you use the keyboard to navigate. And that enables someone who's blind, like myself, to be able to do near enough anything on the computer, as long as it was coded with accessibility in mind. And I'm not fully sure about the context of being remote, but clearly that's really useful when you're remote, if you're thinking about remote from the office. But on the flip side, if you're talking about remote computing, then there's also ways to send that metadata over the internet. So if you have a remote computer, then it can send all that metadata over the wire, and you still get the screen reader speaker locally. And we can talk a bit more about screen readers in mixed reality a little bit later on. That's an exciting topic.
Perfect. So then another question, and I think there's sort of a couple people with this question. It says, has Seeing AI been implemented on any wearable device? And then someone also asked, when can we expect to see Seeing AI on AR or VR headsets?
We've had so many prototypes, and I really want this to happen. I so want this to happen. We had a really cool video, which you can find on the internet, from 2016, where we prototyped this. Ultimately, we're waiting for consumer MR wearables. So I think that maybe, I have no idea, but what I mean is I have no official knowledge, but one imagines that a year or two from now, there will be consumer AR wearables. Like today, you have Nreal with some headset. We've got prototypes on things like HoloLens, of course, being Microsoft, but we're really excited for future devices which will be consumer wearables. And honestly, I think the first ones we will support are blindness-specific devices. This goes back to inclusive design. Because the blind community they have a clear reason for a consumer AR wearable. So when I say consumer, I mean something that costs not much, like $300, something that is comfortable to wear for 12, 16 hours, that doesn't have battery life problems, that has sufficient compute. Those devices just don't exist. But we're talking to a couple of people around blindness-specific devices, because you don't really need the screen. So, wearable cameras with 6 degrees of freedom tracking, and so on and so on. I do believe that the assistive wearable is around the corner, and eventually, I think it's quite possible that everyone will be wearing these headsets all day long. But I think the blind community will be there much sooner. So,
Great.
yeah, very excited.
Perfect. And then the second part of that question was, is the Seeing AI app available on Android? And if not, can we expect to see it available on Android soon?
We started with iOS because that is where the majority of our users in the US and Europe were, because it's a much more accessible platform. But we're always reevaluating Android. And I think, as wearables come into play and so forth, that also, there are a lot of Android opportunities there. So always looking at that.
Awesome. And then Martin asks, will Seeing AI work in places such as art museums describing paintings and sculptures? How realistic does the artwork subject need to be for the AI to recognize the content?
It doesn't, like the computer vision side of it doesn't work in that sense. If there were signs, it'll read the signs. But because artwork is so, it's in the eye of the beholder, it's opinion-based. I think the descriptions would be for abstract art, it would, probably not be able to describe, but even for other art, it would be too logical. But, that's an interesting area. We have neural network scans which can generate artwork. And it's an interesting idea that if you had the data set, could someone generate descriptions of artwork? And I don't know, interesting idea, but not today. However, there's some interesting possibilities which we can talk to later on. Yes, I'll make a note of that. We'll come back to museums and artwork.
Perfect. And then I think one more question, and then we should probably keep going. Did you observe a positive trend in the number of supporting apps like Seeing AI now that AI is capable of that? Will this become a competitive market?
Yeah, we've certainly seen other companies, from startups to big companies, having their own spin on this space. And to me, that as a user, as a customer, that's an awesome thing, because I'm always excited to see what everyone else's personal spin on this is. But that takes me right to the next topic of audio augmented reality, because we found that we were amongst the first, maybe the first at scale, to put out this idea of AI to help blind people. And in some senses, it's becoming commoditized. It's being built into platforms. It's built into other apps. It's getting better and better. Not perfect, but that will keep going over the years. But then we started thinking about a year and a half ago, what's next? If you can recognize what's in a photo and you can have this interactive experience to explore a space by moving your phone, by touching a touchscreen, what does come next? And it really comes down to audio augmented reality. And this really takes us into the idea of what we were skating where the puck's going to be. One day we will have consumer AR wearables. But for now, we have smartphones. And a lot of this was, we had a lot of prototypes, but when we heard that Apple was going to be coming out with a LiDAR device, so the LiDAR was built into iPhone 12 Pro and 13 Pro, and this allows you to know how far away something is. So you can measure the distance to any particular point. And so we have an AR experience in Seeing AI. We call them channels. So you have different channels you switch between, like channels on TV, and there's a world channel. All the other things were task-based: recognize text, recognize people, recognize scenes, recognize the world. And this is this idea that, okay, what does it mean to recognize the world? If we have augmented reality, one of the things that you can do is you can go from recognizing what's in front of you right now to what's in the world. What is this world state? Can we build up 3D world understanding of everything around you? Can we basically have a model representing the whole world around you and everything in it, and then give natural experiences for interrogating, querying, interacting with the world? And so we launched that about a year ago. And I can't speak to quite our latest, but we've continued our work over the past year. And it's a really crazy idea that, what if you hold your phone up through all the sensors, the 6 degrees of freedom, the, I forget the fancy word, reading from all the sensors, and the sensor fusion, you can basically build up a 3D model. Now you can place things in the 3D world. You can say, aha, there's a chair over there and a chair over there, a table over there, plants over there. For objects, for people. Okay, but then what if other people can help you build the world? So now, what if other people are contributing to this world? So what we're doing is we're building a world of metadata alongside the real world. So, again, I talk about early adopters. There's all this fun, fancy talk about a metaverse, blah, 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 blah. That's going to come. But what we have here is a world, like I said, a world of metadata paralleling the real world. So let's see a couple of videos in just a moment. So let me describe it first. Some of the experiences we have. So as you move your phone around, you can get a spatial summary of everything that it sees. So you will hear chair, table, plant, but the voice will come from the object. So if you're wearing headphones, you're going to hear it from 3D space. And this really gives you an overview of everything around you. You can also place a beacon on something. So if you want to find something like the door, it'll say the word door from the door. But also you can make a beacon, like a virtual sound, come from the door. And now you can walk towards it and it'll get louder, or as you turn left and right. And with head tracking, it follows the direction of your head. You'll be able to walk towards it. And again, right now, this is on a phone. One day it will be on a head-worn wearable, I'm sure, as those devices enter the market. And then finally, we have proximity sensor, which through the LiDAR, it gives haptic feedback about how far away different surfaces are. And that's going to let you, for example, find a gap in a wall to go down the corridor and so forth. So it's this multi-sensory experience of everything that's detected in the world, about this 3D model. And then I can't talk too much about our future work, but we're also then looking at, these are the things that computers detect. But you can really imagine, what if humans start helping you? What if you get remote assistance from someone? What if other people augment your world? And then if you go to virtual reality, in a sense, it's even better, because if you don't have to recognize what's in the world. In theory, if you make accessible VR apps, then you'll have all the metadata, and now you can interact in the virtual world through the world of metadata, just like we are with AR. So more about that in a moment. But let's see a couple of videos which demonstrate what's out there today. Have we got the video? Not hearing any audio.
Door.
So you saw that was the example of placing a beacon on a door, walking towards it, and if you had spatial audio, you'd be hearing that coming from the door. And if you could go back one, I don't think the first video played, at least not with audio, so if you can just go back and show the object detection, you'll see the little bubbles.
Preview.
Chair, laptop, table, cup, chair, plan.
Yes, so there you're seeing the little 3D bubbles pop up as things are detected in your world. And again, it's building up this model, this parallel model. And we're keeping working on that, detecting people, tracking people in motion so it doesn't announce them multiple times, that kind of thing. And so much more. So before we move on, I'm going to pause for a bit more interactive discussion.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely have some questions coming in. So one that came in sort of towards the end of our last Q&A time is from Dylan Fox. And Dylan said, or asks, do you think that Seeing AI could be integrated with VR applications to recognize, for example, like digital text?
Yeah, totally. So this is an active area of development research. We're looking at how could you make a screen reader for VR? And that could be through recognition. But the way I think about this is, when we think about 2D apps, like traditional apps, someone had to add the accessibility label. Like at some point, that text was typed into the computer, so we know exactly what it says. So if we can get all the players together, all the SDK makers, all the app makers, in theory, a screen reader, nothing like this exists today, but a screen reader for virtual reality could just say, hey, what's over in that direction? And it would say, there's a signpost with some text on it, and this is what the text says, and so on and so forth. And it could tell you about all the objects and all the relationships between the objects and their position in 3D space. And you would basically, whereas in Seeing AI and augmented reality, we are building up this 3D model of the world. In a VR app, someone's coded that in already. So in theory, we could have that parallel metadata side stream and some interesting experiences, maybe even the Seeing AI world experience you saw there for when you're walking through the world or reading text in the world or whatever else. And a bit vague because no one solved this yet, but I see that that's coming.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan.
Yeah. So another question we have is, do you have any, or can you suggest, I think this is the question they're trying to answer, but if I get it wrong, please feel free to re-ask your question in the chat. Do you have any suggestions on AR solutions that can currently see other people / environment with LiDAR, etc.?
So like I say, with the couple of devices that support LiDAR on iOS, you should try out Seeing AI. There are some other solutions as well. Like, for example, there's one we're very specific for social distancing. Yeah, it really depends what you're looking for. And, feel free to bring me offline and if there's a particular type of solution you're looking for.
Great. And then Dylan just responded back to you answering his question and just said, yeah, getting text metadata into VR is an ongoing challenge. Would be lovely to have a tool that doesn't need as much developer input in the meantime, especially for user-submitted content. So thank you.
That's an ecosystem problem. I think one day developers won't have to do anything special. And in the same way today, you make a button on Windows or on a web page, the button is just accessible. We'll get there with VR as well.
Wonderful. And then another sort of comment that we had from Harpreet, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. They said, creating a complete 3D representation of the world for all purposes for the visually impaired will be cool, especially if it lets them interact with the world like people with normal vision. Another interesting problem is how to convey the rich 3D information via HCI devices and text, since audio is so 1D.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 parts to that. We're talking about spatial audio and 1D audio, and also interact. Yeah, so when developing anything like this, it's really important to keep the human at the center. Yeah, 3D model of the world, that's all technology. But then that's only half the problem. The other half is, how do you enable someone to naturally query, interrogate that environment? So we're looking at different experiences. Like right now, we have some experiences like announcing things in 3D space, like placing beacons, like being able to enumerate the things around you, focus on specific things to dig into certain things. But I think that sort of interaction language, that interaction model is going to come along over time, and that's at least half of the challenge. How do you enable that to be just really natural and part of what you do while you're in your daily life? And you make a really good point about audio is one-dimensional. It's serial. You have to hear one thing, then the next, then the next. And that's why we've been focusing on spatial audio, which enables you to potentially even hear multiple things at once, but it reduces the need to say, hey, chair 3 feet, front left, which would take too long. And also things like beacons or different sounds to represent different actions. So can we have basically audio emoji, as one friend calls them, where different sounds, ear cons, represent different things in your world, and that reduces the amount you have to do through speech. So yeah, totally.
Wonderful. And then another question we have from Alexander Hansen. Alexander asks, what must sighted individuals be aware of when making products and content more accessible?
2 parts to this. The one is, if it's just about accessibility, then there's a bunch of really good courses and materials out there. And there's probably 10 principles, or even maybe 6, 7, you should know. Like, label your images, make sure you can use things without a keyboard, never represent things just by sound or just by color. And yeah, a couple more. But you can find that anywhere on the internet. But the bigger thing is, nothing about us without us. That's a sort of a phrase in the disability community, is if you really want to make sure it's accessible, then it's really easy on the internet. Reach out and you'll get so many volunteers willing to give you feedback on whether the thing you've made is accessible, and have that dialogue with the user base.
That's great. And then I think one more question, and then we can probably keep going with the presentation. So Kenneth asks, are there any pathways for developing using the haptic devices?
Not fully sure I get that. So the haptic device is really good for providing output. I think when coding, you definitely want all the text read and so forth. So that's going to be audio. But I do think, I do think there are haptic devices either built into like a phone or separate accessories. And I think we can do a lot more with them. Today, they're used for kind of reinforcing the visuals. I think there's opportunities to, be much richer with that. And if I didn't answer that, then feel free to ask again a different one.
Great. Well, we can, if you want to keep going, and then we can take a few more questions at the end.
Yes, absolutely. So let's think about the future. So we talked a bit about the mindset of disability as a driver for innovation, people with disabilities being early adopters. We talked a bit about seeing AI, and then about our next chapter of seeing AI, which is audio augmented reality. And, our hope for wearables, initially assistive wearables for the blind, but then beyond that, I think the general consumer wearable as well will come down the road as well. So now, my big vision for the future, the thing that I'm building my team around, is this idea of an assistive agent, this idea that each and every one of us is different. And what if there was a piece of software that lives in your device in the cloud, that understands us, that fills in the gap between what we are able to do in our current situation and what we are capable of doing? So for someone who's blind, like with seeing AI, that's very much, it's going to learn what the things you need to be told about the visual environment are. And maybe I think of it like a friend sitting on my shoulder whispering in my ear. But it will also know what it's already told me and not tell me too much, and it will be my personal agent. But then for someone who's low vision, maybe it will highlight things in a heads-up display. For someone who's hard of hearing, it might interpret the audible world and represent that visually. For someone who's in an unfamiliar space, like maybe abroad, it might do live translation. For someone who just needs extra context of some sort, it can give that extra context. It's kind of embracing this idea that humanity is diverse. This idea that each and every one of us probably wishes at some point that we had that little friend on your shoulder, intermediating the world and helping you understand. And so, yes, we're working on seeing AI as something to help blind people. But when we think about design for one, extend to many, what I really think about is these little assistants which one day will travel with us through the world, in our pockets, on our wearables, in the metaverse, on our laptops, and help us get through the world. And we're starting with one niche community, but this is my vision. And I really believe that, some years from now, this is just going to be the norm. And we'll point back and we'll say, we designed for one. We made it happen, and now it's part of the mainstream. So just a moment to ponder that, and then we can have a final bit of discussion. Yeah, thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. And I will go to the next slide just so folks know where to reach out if we don't get to all the questions today. So we have a few more minutes and we have a couple more questions that have come in. So the first one is from Saeed. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And it says, do you think creating a common sound audio convention like a language could improve the usability of the app?
Potentially. So I don't think we need like a global design language, but in the same way that each of the major UI platforms today has a visual language. We have Fluent at Microsoft, and iOS, Android, they have design languages. I think for MR in general, we might eventually come to a design language for the world, whether that be a visual design language or an audio design language. And that's not something that can come overnight, but it's something that as we talk to users, as we put more experiments out there, we will probably evolve and merge towards, what is it that works best? How is it best to represent things in the world? So it's an interesting idea.
Awesome. So another question is from Grassy Hilltop, and they ask, from an HCI/UX perspective, what is the top design challenge at the top of your list for seeing AR? For example, you mentioned dealing with order of announcement and handling multiple objects.
I think it is this idea in the AR space, especially, of knowing what is relevant. People always said when we were doing the first versions of seeing AI in 2D, why do you have these channels that the user switches between? And that's really because AI really isn't smart enough to know what the human wants. So we decided to put the human in control. And that's still a core principle, is put the human in control. We don't want to, but at the same time, there's so much information in the world. As we move to 3D, as we move to continuous sensing, there's just so much. So it's like you could have an entire control panel of knobs and switches to allow the user to control what they care about and what they're interested in. But we need something much better than that. But equally, we're not good enough to be able to just automatically know what's of interest to you. So I think it is controlling that flow of information and not overwhelming the user. Thank you. It's a good question.
Perfect. All right. And then the next one is the idea of assisted agents connected to haptic-enabled rings is what I have had in mind. Which SDKs are going in that direction, if any?
I don't know much about haptic rings, I got to say. Yeah, till now, we sort of played with the haptic engine inside iOS, which has a very rich API that lets you basically treat haptics same way as audio. And, also on smartwatches. Yeah, I'd have to think about, feel free to reach out, but I have to think about rings. But that's a nice additional layer, especially for people who might be both deaf and blind. Additional information would be useful. And just a tangent there is, we find that you can't do too much haptics on the device because it will cause it to shake, and then that will cause motion blur. So, rings is interesting.
All right. And then another question from Harpreet. How do you see assistive agent being different from Cortana, from a Cortana or an Alexa?
I think Cortana, Alexa, these voice assistants are in some ways the very beginning, but to me, this is a completely different concept but it's also an evolution. So, Cortana knows about your calendar and your email, but what if your assistant knew about everything around you? What if it was, computers can listen, they can see, of course, they can know what's in digital form. So it's this idea of intermediating the world and then it's also at the output. So they can understand everything around you in virtual or real world, and then also know what's interesting to you, and then also what your output mode of choice is. So it's a much bigger vision, many years out than that.
Got it. All right. And another question. This one is from Lee Walker, and Lee asks, do you think you could incorporate a distance indicator using pitch of audio, high pitched, the closer, etc.?
Yes, right now we use volume, but pitch, you can have a few variables with audio like stereo balance and volume and pitch, and there's sort of 3 or 4 things you can affect. So right now we go with volume for distance, so the closer you get, the louder it gets. But pitch is also a good idea.
All right. And then another question coming in from Harpreet. It said, in the early 2000s, Dr. Paul Bakrita, I'll probably mispronounce that, created tongue-mounted pressure devices for visually impaired to see in 3D via the brain learning to interpret the sensor signals as visual signals. Is there any recent work along those lines?
This is really cool. First of all, okay, let me describe what it is. So the idea here is that you can train your brain to learn a whole new sense. So, a brand new sense, not vision, not hearing. It's a new sense. And actually, your brain is very adaptive and can, in this case, they use the tongue because it's the most sensitive part of your body. And so you have pins or, vibrations rather, touching your tongue. This is not socially acceptable or practical for daily life, but it's a cool concept. So the challenges here are, can you get a high enough concentration of information? Tongue is an option, but if it was just your hand, your hands aren't sensitive enough to receive hundreds or thousands of different inputs. But in theory, the idea is you learn a whole new sense by transforming what's in a camera into a different format. And there's some research which transforms it into sound. People have claimed that they can use that to ride a bike, to pick up a cup from a table. But it takes months or years, and I've never managed to learn it because it's like learning a whole new language. But anyway, sensory substitution is sort of the technical term if you want to look it up. And there's a great TED talk where they've translated speech so someone who was hard of hearing could get vibrations on their back corresponding to sound waves. It's a fascinating field, but I don't think there's anything practical out there today.
All right. And then I think we have two more questions, and I definitely want to get to Grassy Hilltop's last question. So one more before that is from Nia, and they ask, can spatial audio along with haptics improve user experience?
Yeah, totally. So for our users, it's essential, but I think for everyone, it really. So just if we just think about normal user interfaces, whether screen or mixed reality, something like haptics is really used in smartphones today to reinforce something. So maybe you drag something and it can't go further, and you're going to feel some resistance, which is simulated through haptics on the phone. Or you tap something and you check something and you can sort of have this sense of it being depressed. And sorry, haptics, spatial audio, yeah, likewise. It's starting to become part of the mainstream. It's been something we've used in the blind community for 20 plus years, but in the mainstream right now, people have got applications so that as you look left and right, the audio will still come from the direction of your screen. To me, that's like a very weak example. I think, there's so many richer possibilities, but you could imagine a conference call where everyone is spatialized around you. And so you hear some people, it kind of gives this cocktail party effect where you can hear multiple people at once because they're all coming from different places. And yeah, a lot of good research on that, how humans can hear different people when they're coming from different places. Just a few ideas.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. So the last question, I think this one is a good one to end it on. Grassy Hilltop asks, in five years into the future, what are you most looking forward / dreaming of doing with seeing AI superpowers that you can't do today? If you could wish for anything.
Wow, and this is where I want the AI to be personalized to me in every situation. And it could be, I don't know, what there are really simple things today that AI can't do. Could I seriously just turn up in a location and find my way around through cues of the environment? Could I play football with my son because there is some crazy, we can recognize a ball moving in 3D and give it, and my ball has a bell in it. So there's not the biggest problem, but could we do that? Or could we, I don't know, mind is boggling. Like, could we drive a car? I don't think that's happening in 5 years, and we'll probably have self-driving cars first. But the cool thing here is just imagine every part of life, and everyone's life is different. And that's where our conversation goes. We have this ongoing conversation with people who are like, we'd love to be able to use the washing machine we just bought that had a touchscreen, and I can't use it, or whatever it be. It's really, I sometimes say this is smoothing the road bumps in life. And there are so many cool things I love to do. But like I said at the beginning, I'm someone who can't see. I'm also a hacker. So for every problem, I want to find the solution. And with Seeing AI, it's incrementally listening to, of course, my own needs, but then the needs of the community, talking to the scientists, and one by one, smoothing out those road bumps, finding those solutions. And I really am excited to see where we could be 5 years from now. And the team is hiring. So if you want to be on this journey with us, then we're hiring folk in Bangalore and either Redmond or Cambridge, Redmond near Seattle, and Cambridge in the UK. So yeah, if you have questions, comments, just want to chat, feel free to reach out, email or Twitter. I love talking about this stuff, as you've probably heard this hour, and let's keep the dialogue going. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all your time today. That was great questions and comments in the chat. And we would love to have you back for another session again. So stay tuned. And if you all have a few moments and can fill out our reactor survey, I shared the link in the chat and we greatly appreciate your feedback. Thanks so much, everyone.